Let's come back. This is a postcard from JPL inviting my wife Nisa and I to Huygens Arrives at Titan. Thursday, January 13, 2005. We're at December 13 today, 2014. So just about 10 years ago. The 10 years, the decade of Cassini-Huygens at Saturn, especially with the quality that someone like a Carolyn Porco is able to bring, an artistic quality to the science, so that she tunes art and science. In our Learning Civilization program, the first year of 2 is the nature cycle. Nature, ritual, myth, symbol, that has its transform into vision, art, history, science, so that the qualities of the equinoxes are qualities of form in the Learning Civilization paired year program. My wife Nisa's app that brings it into a presentation from a very interesting context of we're going on a journey. We're going on a very high yana. We're going on a Parayana, and our vehicle is a starship, the Hummingbird. And the app is startling in its quality of art and science together that bring in not only the preparatory qualities of field and process into the way in which forms take emergent shape. At the equinoxes, the solstices of an initial sense of a field, and then the other solstice, a sense of the flow of that, in that field. In the first year, the flow is the flow of experience, of myth, of the mythos, the mythic horizon of language, images, feelings, and this flow is within the field of nature. In the second year, what has opened up through the transparency, the portal of the symbols, is a whole second, not a second cycle. It's an ecology of expansion into a harmonic, where the 4 seasons as 4 phases in the first year now have a transform into the phases becoming dimensions. So that vision is not a 5th phase so much as a 5th dimension. That the entire quaternary of space-time as 4 dimensions is gone beyond, not to erase it or efface it, but to expand, deepen, heighten, widen into scalars almost unexpressible except doable before, and now there. And so the field of vision is an infinite field of reality, of differential consciousness that is deeply in complementarity with the zero field of nature that allows for ones to emerge whole, like a Tao Te in the Chinese, that out of the mysterious zero field Tao the unity, oneness, exactness of the te occurs in such a way that it is fertile to have more levels of te, more rather than just some kind of a point which beautifully in astrophysics at Caltech a few years ago, when it was apparent that the structural elements that make up the atom, that make up the nucleus of the atom, is made up of points in triplicate, like the proton, made up of 3 quarks. And quark is a phrase that Murray Gell-Mann picked out of literature, out of James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, to express the mysteriousness of these super refined points, pointillistic, and that quarks cluster, they never appear as singles, they always appear as pairs, or sometimes, most of the time, when they make a form to hold in a nucleus, like the proton, they'll be in triplicate, 3. The latest developments at CERN, looking at all of the trillions of bits of information gathered through the first preliminary running of CERN, not yet at full strength as it will be next year, after a hiatus of trying to process, CERN physicists discovered 2 new subatomic particles that are, yes, they're made of 3 quarks, like the proton, but each one of the 2 is 6 times as heavy as the proton. They're really massive particles. They're called chi b, with a superscript b, little font, chi b prime, and chi b double prime. What CERN is looking for is to come upon a particle which does not fit the standard model, whereas the standard model could accept that, all right, surprise, surprise, but chi b prime and chi b double prime still fit in. They just expand the pieces of the puzzle. And do we have all of the puzzle? We will not know until we come upon a particle in the nucleus that is participant in the strong force that holds it into its integral, a nucleus, that does not fit into the puzzle of the standard model. It's a piece that was not in that puzzle, so that puzzle was a false limit. The model, standard as it's been, will no longer be acceptable as the be-all and end-all. They're looking for a particle that does not fit. In terms of what we are developing here in the Parayana and beyond, in the learning civilization itself, is that there is a massive shift that cannot be measured from the 4-dimensional continuum of space-time into a 5th dimension where differential consciousness comes into play. It's like in the theater, the 5th business is the magic of the theater. It's the magic of the performance, the magic of the night. Anyone who's been in one of those kinds of theatrical plays, live, not a film, knows that there are there are magical evenings. And the first time I experienced that in high school, I played Malvolio in a production of Twelfth Night. And the director was working on his PhD, LLD from Britain, and he was directing it. And one of the performances with pit and balcony players was a magical evening. Not that we were great actors, but that Shakespeare's theater produced with the elan of discovery happening while you were playing it, and the audience resonating with it because they were like Saturn's rings in acoustic resonance with the acoustic seismology of what was happening on the stage, in the play. All the world's a play for that audience of the differentially conscious who are understanding that this is live theater. And someone like a Carolyn Porco is enormously interesting, not as a protagonist in some kind of a plotted scenario, but as a free-form creative artist. Her speciality was not just Saturn's rings and its density wave layering and structuring, of which she expanded it immensely. There were many new rings that were found, and not only rings, but the whole realization, because Cassini was refined enough to see there are shepherding little moons that keep the integral layering of the planet's seismology of acoustic waves into the density waves that are expressed in the structure of the many, many rings now, and the shepherding moons as well. And even within gaps between what were rings before, there are little mysterious qualities of rings. And not only that, she found, her imaging people found, not only does Saturn have rings, but Uranus has rings as well. And there are very faint, but nevertheless there are rings around Neptune as well. So that when one comes out with, this is published, Cambridge Planetary Science, the hardcover is April 14th, 2014, Planetary Rings, a post-equinox view. And so just earlier this year, Cambridge Publishing, and it mentions Carolyn Porco quite frequently. By the way, her great personal book, published in hardcover October 27th, 2014, The Art of Space, the History of Space Art from the Earliest Visions to the Graphics of the Modern Era. And you can find it on Amazon under Carolyn Porco. The Art of Space. It is this quality of the artist, the creative imaginative, who remembers and furnishes for memory, not just the memory in the symbolic structure of the mind, but of remembering while one is in the visionary dimension of differential consciousness, that it comes through a prism, the prismatic crystals, if you will, of the artistic person, that one gets the full spectrum, one gets the astrophysics of the universe become a cosmos. And that spectrum in the learning civilization is history. That history is the complex, conscious, kaleidoscopic flow of differential consciousness in the field of vision as a differential, conscious, infinite field through the prism of the conscious, artistic, creative imagining, remembering person, that the science then will emerge in complement, in tuned with the art. It is this quality then that allows for a seismology of resonance to tune to the density waves of an expression of it that gives the arts and sciences their university level Renaissance style of exploration into furthering understanding by inquiry, into furthering that analytic by a complementarity with an aesthetic, an appreciation that all of this is personal, which is shared. It isn't just the individual as the be-all simple center of a circle of space-time, but it is in play as a universe expanded to a cosmos that is a dynamic that is available for the adventures of discovery. One of the great early Renaissance, 2,000 years before our Renaissance, about 500 BC. One of the great figures in that Renaissance was Pythagoras. And what is remembered from Pythagoras, his 3 great books have been lost, conveniently lost in later centuries due to the obfuscation of those who enjoy obscuring. What remained were some sayings of Pythagoras, and one of the most mysterious of his sayings, the ancient Greek phrase was ipsa dixit, he said. He said, geometry is history. In a dynamic consciousness way of further dimensioning, which Pythagoras was very capable of, and those around him, the Pythagoreans, interestingly enough, the Pythagoreans were one of the first communities to have parity between men and women. Pythagoras' wife later in life is finally married, and Theano was the author of a couple of surviving long fragments of letters, very discursive, quite artistic, quite scientific, which illuminated, because they were found in fragments of papyri that were found in Egypt, that a very large letter existed from a woman some almost unsuspected. Not only did Theano write scientific artistic letters, but later on the influence of Theano influenced a woman one of whose long letters still exists, and one can find it in translations. Her name was Perictione, and she was the mother of Plato. Yes, Plato had a mother, a very literate, conscious, artistic, scientific mother, which is how Plato got Pythagoreanized as a young man growing up. And it wasn't until his own development of the way in which he was expanding himself as being like a super tutor. He was tutoring very powerful men, almost exclusively, and finally came to be tutoring the tyrant of Syracuse on Sicily, Dion, and Dion's son, another Dion, and decided that Plato was corrupting his son, his potential family rule of the power of his kingdom, and so he jailed Plato. And Plato was sprung from his imprisonment by a man named Archytas, who was a Pythagorean, who was the head of a community in South Italy, and brought Plato out of prison from Syracuse into the Pythagorean communities of South Italy, and there it was that they enlightened him. That Pythagoras, in order to become the Pythagoras of kaleidoscopic history, of differential conscious vision, had a very special kind of a childhood himself, developed by a mother who was very much like Perictione, a highly intelligent and sensitive of Plato. The mother of Pythagoras was the head priestess on Samothrace. And when she met and fell in love, and they decided to get married, her husband ran big shipping concerns from the ancient Phoenician coast of the eastern Mediterranean with the Aegean and beyond, and they were married at Delphi. And Pythagoras' mother took a new name, Pythias, from the Pythian oracle, because the Pythian oracle, always a young woman, seated on the tripod, the three-legged stool, over the vapors coming from the mysterious depths of the earth to be a different atmosphere, a visionary atmosphere that only she could develop in such a high poetic. They were always riddles, because it was not just a poetic, it was an analytical displacement that was a scramble that would take extra dimensions of consciousness to be able to understand, like the squiggles that make up a Feynman diagram or a molecular structure. And so she named her pregnancy to come Pythagoras. He will be born as Pythagoras, the son of the vision of the Pythian Apollo. And he will be able to make a set, a resonant set of 9 muses in a parenthetical scalar that will be indexed by a 10th, and that this will be indeed a new way to have all of the arts with a comprehensive cosmic science analytic capacity. And this would be someone who would be schooled not only in the upbringing on their home island of Samos in the Aegean. Samothrace is at the very top near Thrace, Samothrace. Thrace, where Orpheus, some 1,000 years, millennium before, had been a great sage and poet. Pythagoras went from this fertile household at age 21 and went to Egypt where the family had business ties. He was born in 570 BC, and so it was about 550, 549 BC, and he spent 22 years in Egypt. And after that, he spent 11 years in ancient Iran. And only later, in his mid-50s, came back to Samos, matured, and matured again, and matured yet again. So Plato went off to Egypt. He went to Heliopolis, where Pythagoras had been for 22 years. He stayed long enough to understand that what one does with this expansiveness is to share it. Because its mysteries are mysteries of presence, not of the present. It's not of countable time. It's of uncountable vistas. And he went back to Athens and founded the Platonic Academy. And for 40 years taught and headed the Academy of Plato in Athens. And that expanded the Pythagorean communities into what we understand now. We understand it as the beginnings of philosophy. Alfred North White had said all of philosophy seems to be a footnote to Plato. But it's Pythagoras as the seed of the garden of Plato become the whole landscape of the love of wisdom, philosophy. Pythagoras was the first to say, I'm a philosopher. I love Sophia. I love Lady Wisdom. When we look at the learning civilization, its quality in consciousness is to have those wonderful equinoxes of art and science where there's an art of recognizing. Plato says over and over again in his various dialogues that first of all, learning is not cognition, it's recognition. And we can't recognize until we have the ability to have companionability. We have to be able to have someone that we can talk to in such a way that the conversation is two ways. It's a minimum of two, tuned as a dialogue. Monologues don't cut it. Monologues make for ego. I'm the whole show. No, you're not. You're just a display. This quality of the dialogue can be expanded. It can be expanded to 2, into 3, like quarks. Now you got a proton. Now you have something that is really a universal nucleus with 3. It can be more. The next level at which the stability holds of the exploration of a conscious dimensioning, more than 5, at least 6 by the time you have an artist, 7 by the time history is brought into play, and 8 when there's science. It is a quality where the exploration, like Carolyn Forco, realizes that there is life beyond what we considered to be life, and one of her specialities, beyond rings of Saturn and rings of Uranus, rings of Neptune, is to look at the moons of Saturn, and her specialty was the closest major moon to Saturn, Enceladus. And she's the one that noticed first in the photographic readout of the telemetry that Enceladus has liquid water spewing in volcanoes of it, especially at the South Pole. And that spectrographical analysis of that water shows organic compounds, carbon-based. Enceladus can support life. We're going to come back next week and look more at presentation 51 of some of the tremendous recognitions going on in science. But as art recognizes, science realizes. And so the stability of art recognizing who, it's person to person, to persons. Plurals without limit, without end. Science is realizing why. And just as shared presence, recognizing who, all the whos, and science realizing why, all the whys, there is a deadening that is not shared presence that can best be called incurred absence. An incurred absence cherishes, sabotaging who and why by having a doubting what and a missing where. Where is it? You can't find it. You can't see it. Prove it. You don't know what. We doubt it. We doubt it. And with their doubting what, they make a neon why not. More next week.